Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. You've certainly noticed how the coverage of the mass killings has changed since Wednesday of last week. All of that breathless white media coverage has gone from talking about 19 people killed to talking about 4 people killed last Wednesday, and now in the last 48 hours, they're giving wall-to-wall coverage to 3 people having been killed. Obviously, that's not to say that a loss of life is not deserving of attention, not deserving of mention. But to compare that to what happened in Uvalde and Buffalo, you would think the white media would look and say the situation's getting better. But the lower the fatalities, the more hysterics they've chosen to go into. They're talking about the situation in the last few days as if it's worse than it's ever been. Before, people were talking about a lone gunman who planned and carried out a mass murder. 10 people in Buffalo, 8 of them black, 19 in Uvalde, Texas. Everyone was asking why there had been no movement by Biden advocating for a major policy shift. No major speeches, nothing. After all, if 10 people in Buffalo getting killed by a white race terrorist wasn't enough to make Biden move, if the murders of 19 elementary school children and 2 teachers wasn't enough to get him to make a major proposal, then what would it take? Well, as with anything else in Biden's life, seems the only time he ever gets motivated to do something is if it's regarding going after black people. Last Wednesday, a Haitian gunman, Michelet Louis Baptiste, went into a Tulsa hospital with an AR-15, and he murdered 2 doctors as well as 2 other bystanders. And credit to Brother Tariq for figuring out the shooter's real name and place of origin. Now, the white media and those in government felt like that tragedy gave them their in to pivot the discussion to black people. As soon as you saw that they had a black gunman to point to, you knew what comes next. Now it's time to make black people the face of the problem. Before it was about guns, now it's going to be about black people. At first, a lot of people didn't think much of it. After all, black immigrants aside, it's not as if there's a rash of black people walking into schools or grocery stores or hospitals with assault rifles shooting the place up. You'll be very hard-pressed to find any examples of black people who do that. But then the white media, as they always do, very subtly, very quietly changed their attention from mass killings to shootouts. Now, it doesn't matter how many die for the white media. At this point, that's irrelevant. What matters is whether or not people got shot. And so we see 11 people being injured in Philadelphia being elevated to the same level as 19 children killed. They even decided to shoehorn in the same kind of verbiage that's normally only given to those who have committed some sort of mass killing with an AR-15, such as active shooter, which implies that the individual is still out there with the gun looking for their next victim, and everybody better take cover because everybody's under threat. So now, anytime that Pookie and Ray Ray shoot at each other, that's considered an active shooter situation. Now, we, the black media, told you this was the game plan all along. Not that you needed a crystal ball to see it, they always do this. To compare a mass shooting as being the same as a mass killing, that's right out of the white supremacist talking points. It's the same lie they try to pull when they falsely claim that black people commit the majority of mass shootings in America, according to XYZ source. These white supremacists can't deny who's responsible for the mass killings, so they try to invent a definition where the fatalities no longer matter. I've told you before about the rhetorical trick called creating a false association. This is done by taking 2 vaguely related or even totally unrelated things and mentioning them over and over again in close proximity. This was how W conned people into thinking that Saddam Hussein had something to do with the September 11th attacks. He would give speech after speech where he would say Saddam and 9/11 in the same sentence over and over again. Saddam, 9/11. 9/11, Iraq. Al-Qaeda, Saddam. Saddam, 9/11. And he did it over and over again until most Americans actually thought that Saddam had something to do with the 9/11 attacks. Even after W finally admitted what most thinking people already knew, that Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11, there were still a lot of people, mostly on the right, who to this day still think that he did. On Saturday night in Philadelphia, there was a shootout. 3 dead, which doesn't elevate this to a mass killing, even by the white supremacist numbers, but 11 people were injured. So now they can call it a mass shooting. Even though it wasn't a single individual who did it, it was a number of individuals who were involved. There was nobody with an AR-15. They used handguns, street punks with pistols. Biden's assault weapon ban proposal wouldn't have stopped the tragedy in Philadelphia because they didn't use assault weapons. And since there weren't 4 or more fatalities, why is this being shoehorned into the same conversation as Buffalo and Uvalde? Pookie and Ray Ray injuring 10 people while they fight it out over drug turf is not the same as Peyton Gendron putting his head together with a federal agent, then meticulously planning out how he would murder nearly 10 black people. But then, early yesterday morning at a nightclub in Chattanooga, Tennessee, there was another shootout between some street punks resulting in 3 people dead. That's not a mass killing either, even by the white supremacist so-called experts, but because 14 people were injured during the shootout, the white media is very eager to attach the label mass shooting to it because that's the rhetorical talking point they have to reach. That way they can direct whatever action is going to be taken against us. This is all about getting that lens off of the dominant society and getting it onto anyone else, preferably black people. After the Tulsa shooting, Biden suddenly found the nerve to tell Congress they need to reinstitute the assault weapons ban. And now you see the white media trying to fix it in the public mind that the mass shooting epidemic is actually a black shooting epidemic. They're changing the conversation from killings to shootings, and from gunmen with assault rifles to any old punk with a handgun, so long as they're black. This is why we cannot let them get away with trying to conflate mass shooting with being the same as a mass killing. This is weasel words with lethal results. I guess the white media looked and said, we're taking too much time talking about some white perpetrator. Isn't there some black one who we can bring to the conversation? And if not, that's okay. We'll put a slant on it so we can go ahead and shoehorn them into it. Just like the whole MeToo Time's Up scheme. Whenever people are focusing too much attention on a white person who's done wrong, then the white media immediately begins a media blitz, a feeding frenzy, where they find some black person and then just attack the hell out of them. It's a typical white media maneuver. The kind of conversation that is relevant with the Buffalo mass killer or the Uvalde mass killer doesn't apply to gang shootouts. And yet you notice that Jim Crow Joe waited until after that Haitian killed those people in that hospital before he decided it was time to tell Congress we need to bring back the assault weapons ban. Apparently 19 dead school children along with their teachers wasn't enough for him. They always wait until there's some black person who they can attach the legislation to. That way everybody understands what prompted the change in law. And the white media becomes fixated on reinforcing that. The mass killings were adding up, and with people mad about inflation, they don't want any more problems, so the pressure was mounting. And they're not about to let public pressure force them to put laws on the books meant to punish people from the dominant society. So expect to see all the major white media becoming as obsessed over Chicago as Fox News. Expect them to pick up and repeat those talking points from Tucker Carlson or the other white supremacists that you see online, where they look for any shootout between gangbangers and they'll say, well, that's a mass shooting and why aren't we dealing with that? This is not about addressing the subject. This is about changing the subject. Don't be fooled. Biden didn't have to wait until Tulsa to give that empty assault weapons speech. He wanted to wait until that happened. And if there hadn't been a black gunman in Tulsa, then he simply would have bided his time until there was, or until the issue faded from the headlines, whichever came first. No matter what Biden says about assault weapon bans, no matter how much the white media pushes the line meant to convince you that there's this sudden rash of crazy Negroes going wild, keep in mind, the issue is mass killings, not mass shootings. Because no matter what they try to tell you, the ones who they're gunning for now is us. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Loke Thies, Robert Hill, Elaine Zanga, Cedric Etheridge, and Joe Marshall. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.